I have been looking at your works,
Yes.
your engagement with the world, your engagement with Nigeria.
Yes.
And I'm particularly interested in looking at rural development
Yes.
in this talk with you.
Okay.
The last time I came here, I discussed land reform.
Yes.
Now I'm interested in rural development, especially as it has to do with your role at the Directorate of Food, Roads and Rural Infrastructure.
Yes.
But before we go into D3 proper,
Yes.
this question of rural development,
Yes.
Awolowo had to call you at the time
Yes,
to
that's
talk
correct.
about it.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about the discussion with Awolowo?
Well, he was hoping that the I can't remember now, election,
1979
79 election will get him to the presidency. And to that extent, he wanted to make a major shift of attention from the urban to the rural. And so we had to start worrying what is there to do. Now, I always start by saying I grew up within a totally urban environment, both when I was born in Kano and when I came to do my highest, well, the higher education.
Yeah.
I came to Ibadan Grammar School. I came to the University of Ibadan. And so throughout my growing up years, I had very little contact with rural areas until I went to Britain. And when I got to Britain, my study was essentially about how the rural area was transformed by different groups from the Danish, the Scandinavians, the French, and then of course the British themselves. And that made me, and we had to study what they left behind in place names, in various things that they did in the rural area. So that by the time I finished my first degree, my excitement was to come back to Nigeria and see what is there in the rural area, what we have done with our own rural area. And so when I came back, by the way, I had also in the process of doing that, after my first degree, my research was about the missionaries who came to Nigeria from about 1842 and went to Egba division, where they saw what had happened to Egba land. And my dissertation was therefore titled, what? I'm starting to forget.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Okay. It's about rural settlement and rural development in Egba division.
So did the meeting with Awolowo help you actualize your expectations about rural development?
Yes, he was ready, because what had then happened was that apart from him prodding us, my friend and colleague at the time, the late Professor Ojetunji Aboyade, comes from a very rural setting. And we had already started trying to see how to develop his area.
You're talking about Awe?
We're talking about Awe. And I had the, at the time, the Awe people were about to celebrate some anniversary.
Yeah.
And they were going to build another town hall. And I said, but you are essentially a rural people. Why don't we do something about your rural heritage? And so we started already trying to organize the rural area of Awe, where, of course, I came to learn some other things about the rural areas.
Before the organization of Awe people,
Yes.
Awolowo wanted a rural development policy.
That's correct.
What inspired him? What was he really looking for?
Well, again, is the fact that much of Nigeria is not urban. The urban is essentially a Western Nigeria phenomena. The Yorubas in the past lived in towns. But really since then, it's been the rural, and they haven't had as much advantage of development as the urban area. Everybody knows an urban area must have roads, must have electricity, must have a number of things. But the rural area, for them to develop, actually also need those things. But as I said, because of how scattered they are,
Yeah.
in different sizes, it was not always easy. And yet, if you don't develop them, they are the backbone of any country. I mean, if you want to industrialize, the raw material must come from the rural area. You must do something about making them feel part of development.
And if the rural area is not developed, the
Yeah.
country remains in squalor.
Well, this country really would have problem developing.
So it was important for Awolowo to have a policy
Yes.
on rural development.
That's correct too.
And he termed it optimum community.
Okay, what happened was in the process, we had to write a paper for him and was talking about how to organize the rural area for effective production. And you discovered that, in fact, if you move into the rural area, they are in groups. But nobody had attempted to use that grouping as the focus of development. You know, they are, because the rural market, you know, they're not just all over the place without some rationality. There is a rationality to the way rural markets are developed. So what we then did was to say, let's organize the rural area into what was called an optimum community, which he then says it's an Opticom strategy. And so it was from Awolowo that the concept of Opticom as a strategy of development came up.
And that was foresight, right?
It was. You know, and many people still don't appreciate the fact that the rural area, in fact, to be able to service the urban area, because that's really what they do. If you're going to industrialize, your raw material must come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't pay attention to where that raw material will come from, after some time, you will have problems. If you don't put roads there, if you don't put improved facilities for the people to get to them.
So that's the problem we are witnessing today.
That is true too, yes, that we have neglected the basic infrastructure.
Is it not painful that in 1978,
Yeah.
a leader thought it wise to come out with a policy that would develop the rural area more than 40 years after?
And we're still not there.
Is it not painful, sir?
It is. Well, you starting to talk about what makes a leader, because that's really what Nigeria hasn't had, a real leader who can see the totality of our problems, not just from the minuscule of our own area, but from the totality of the area he's meant to lead. And leadership is still the real thing that is very, it hasn't been real developed in Nigeria.
Awolowo did not win the election of 1979.
Yes,
And there was a plan already on the table.
yes.
That was what you took to our community.
Well, the truth was, Awolowo was used to fighting an election on the basis of what we call policy papers. Even the first action group government of Western Nigeria started with a whole series of what would we do if we won the election in forestry, in agriculture, in health, in what would we do?
And there were policy papers.
And there were policy papers. So when, for instance, he then won, and a person like Akinloye, you know, Chief Adisa Akinloye,
Yes.
was in another party but joined the action group, and they were going to offer him the position of a Minister of Agriculture of Western Nigeria. He had to study that policy paper and make sure that what was in it becomes what he carried out. Okay, so when Awolowo was now thinking of going to the federal, he had to put together a number of us to provide for him policy papers, which, if he had won, would have become the basis of what government does in the rural area, in the urban area, and so on.
That means a leader must also learn to identify talents like Mabogunje who could design policy papers.
Well, that's true. That's why you don't have to know him, but by the time you've consulted, you would find people from different parts of the country who can come together and give you a policy paper.
Was Opticom Strategy for Development successful in our community?
Well, I wish you would ask the Aware people, because in fact, they were surprised. Okay, one of the things that came out of that effort was the fact that, okay, they now realize their rurality, and that they can move forward without not just their rural members, but particularly the women. Because what was interesting for me was that each time we moved to an area which was to be one of the Opticom, the women were the most interesting. Because
What made them interesting?
because you see, as soon as they realize you appreciate them, they go for what they are best known for, catering, you know. So if we're having a meeting in their part of the place, the women are busy cooking, talking together. Actually, it's amazing that once you put them into the development framework, they go for what they understand best, catering for people who are thinking, who are doing things, you know, and it's so easy to really mobilize them to start doing things for themselves.
But at a point,
Yes,
our farmers
yes,
also became Nigerians.
Yes.
With regard to who used the tractor,
yes,
for what acre.
yes,
At that point, you needed to re-strategize,
yes,
and these tractors were given to private individuals
yes,
to run.
yes.
Did that save the situation?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it helped to increase the acreage that was under cultivation, that we could buy a second, because the bit about the tractor was a gift from the Western Regional Government at the time.
Bolaige was
Bolaige
the governor.
was the governor, and he was appreciative of what we were trying to do. So he gave us a tractor with all the, okay, but we later on bought another one. Okay, now what was happening was that, of course, I said yes and no, because the no was, you see, we didn't necessarily solve all the Nigerian ailments. And you were starting to have farmers trying to get the tractor operator to impute to them fewer acreage than they were doing,
So that it will pay less.
that they will pay less. And that, after some time, we did buy a second, but it was starting to affect attitude to the Opticom. That those who were, I mean, the tractor hiring service of Opticom was a major factor in holding farmers together. But suddenly they were finding some people were cheating. Okay, and that, after some time, weakened the enthusiasm for the Opticom as a solution to their rural problem.
Is that not one of the disadvantages of community efforts?
Well, I think myself, it's a leadership problem, even at that level.